Heather represents Silver Spring and Tacoma Park in the Maryland General Assembly. Before joining the General Assembly, she was a Tacoma Park City Council person. She worked for more than a decade on Capitol Hill, including a stint with Senator John Kerry's domestic policy director. Heather has been a vocal champion for expanding health coverage, creating green and high-tech jobs, protecting Maryland's environment, improving Maryland's transparency, and reforming our criminal justice system. Heather would be Maryland's first female governor and the first gay governor in the nation. Her campaign is supported by the Maryland Sierra Club, Emily's List, Maryland Now, and the Montgomery County Fraternal Order of Police, among many others. Heather lives in Montgomery County. She owns a small business in Silver Spring and a farm on the Eastern Shore. Let's give a warm welcome to Delegate Heather Mizeur.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this important dialogue tonight, and thank you to the Greater Baltimore Economic Forum for hosting this important exchange. Some people run for governor because they want the job. Others run because they want to do the job. And I have always been a doer. I have been known my entire career in the General Assembly of bringing people together to get big things done. Like my Kids First initiative, which was a unique and innovative way to go out and find and enroll 50,000 more children in our health insurance program in the state. Or reaching across the aisle to work with the head of the Tea Party caucus to expand free family planning services to 35,000 more women in our state, driving down our infant mortality rates and our low birth weight babies while lowering abortion rates and saving the state money. I led the charge to make sure that, unlike every other state in the nation, Maryland didn't drill first, frack first, and ask questions later to disastrous consequences. I wanted to make sure that we had safety studies in place first that would inform what's the impact on the environment going to be, on our public health, on the economy, before we ever make a decision on whether or not to drill. Our precious natural resources cannot be taken lightly. Second chances are really expensive, and we have to get this one right the first time. You want an environmentalist governor that's going to make this decision, and I'm proud to have the support of the Sierra Club. It's the next governor that gets to make this decision, along with many others. Will we finally tackle the income inequality gap in our state? I have a plan for middle-class families and seniors on fixed incomes to be able to earn more and be taxed less. Earn more because we're not going to wait for an election year to address wage stagnation. We're going to not just have an increase in the minimum wage, but get us to a living wage. And on tax policy, I believe that if we ask corporations and millionaires to pay their fair share, we would be able to generate enough meaningful revenue to give 90% of the rest of Maryland a tax cut, along with every one of our small businesses. On the education front, I want to tackle the achievement gap and eliminate it entirely. It still matters in Maryland what your socioeconomic status is, what your race is, to determine whether or not you're going to be successful in school. And we know it doesn't have to be that way. When we invest in 0 to 5 initiatives for our children, early childhood education, we have an opportunity to give every child a chance to enter school ready to learn at the exact same pace. I have a plan for truly comprehensive, universal pre-K, child care subsidies for middle-class families, and investing in after-school initiatives for our youth. It's important for us to come together in this election to pick a leader who is not about protecting the status quo, but about bringing us together to help Maryland live up to her full potential. I'm Heather Mizeur, and with your help and support, I'll be the next governor of Maryland, and I ask for your vote on June 24th.
Heather, our first question will be from Donald Fry, who is the president of the Greater Baltimore Committee. Don?
Senator?
Excuse me, he was a state senator also. Excuse me, Mr. Fry.
Maryland's post-recession economic growth and job creation could best be described as sluggish. Despite Maryland's considerable strengths as a place to locate a business, many people point to our state's tax policies as a major reason for our low business climate reputation. You touched a little bit on this specifically. How would you reform Maryland's tax policies to make Maryland more competitive?
Thank you for the question, Senator, and thank you for all the work that you do at the Greater Baltimore Committee to continue to address these issues in Annapolis. It's a pleasure to work with you on this topic. I reject the notion that Maryland is unfriendly to businesses. We have the second lowest tax rate, corporate tax rate in our region. We have a handful of companies in Maryland, however, that aren't paying their fair share. They're playing a tax avoidance scheme where the money they make in Maryland gets hidden in other states. And they're not paying any of the taxes on that policy. If we close that loophole and make them pay their fair share, we could generate as much as $200 million in new revenue that I would dedicate to cuts for small businesses. Small businesses are the backbones of our economy. I'm a small business owner. I know what it's like to create jobs and meet payroll. And I know that what makes for a smart business economy is an economy that has workforce training and education opportunities, safe communities, good schools, investments in modern 21st century transportation infrastructure. These are the things that come together to inform the question of whether or not you want to locate your business here or not. And our regulatory policy is a very important piece. I hear more often from employers that what impacts their decision to start or grow a business in Maryland is whether or not our rules of engagement are clear. Do they know how to compete and succeed in our state? When I first looked into composting in our state, we weren't doing curbside recycling or curbside composting because large industrial compost facilities said, we don't know how to operate in Maryland. Your ag department, your natural resources department, and your environment department all have different rules and regulations for how to get composting done. So I'm going to choose to operate in all the other states around you. We came together, fixed those laws, had one clear pathway for what the regulations would be, and we now have created a roadway for 1,400 new green economy composting jobs in Maryland because we fixed our regulatory environment. It's not just taxes, it's our taxes and cutting red tape. Those combined together is how we're going to continue to make Maryland a place where businesses want to compete and grow.
Thank you. Next question from the president of SunTrust Bank, Sam DePaul.
Well, should we answer the same questions, or can we?
Pardon me?
Same
You may ask Delegate Mizeur anything you want, right?
So,
Heather?
Yes.
Great.
She can handle it.
We wanted to ask you a question about Sparrows Point. As you know, Sparrows Point is a unique tract of land and an asset that has access to our deepwater port. As ownership is being reconciled with the various owners of, or various parties claiming the ownership of Sparrows Point, what is your vision for the future of Sparrows Point? And how do you plan to work with the people and organizations suggesting new uses for the land? And how will you ensure that?
But we know that we've got an environmental remediation problem that we're going to have to address and clean up in order to get us there. Our port is the crown jewel of our economy, and we have been having so much success with what they call RoRo, roll on, roll off, bringing cars and other goods and services into the port. We're one of the first ports in the entire country that has made our portways passable by the larger cargo ships that are now coming through the revised Panama Canal. And that demand for growth means that we need more area to be able to handle the growth in the economic activity. And by getting at the environmental remediation issues at Sparrows Point and cleaning up the land creates an opportunity for better synergy with the port and the growth of jobs there. And that is part of the vision that I have for the growth of the economy in our region and in making sure that Sparrows Point continues to be a place where we can create jobs and opportunity instead of it being a blight on our community.
Thank you. Next question, Scott Dorsey, Chairman of Merit Properties.
My question is about the fiscal challenges that are facing the state government. For more than a decade, Maryland has addressed this persistent structural deficit by borrowing special funds intended for other uses like transportation and open space to shift to the general fund and converting operating expenses to long-term debt. Is this a practice that you would continue? And if not, specifically, how would you address what has become a perennial structural deficit?
It's a great question because for far too long, governors have used a shell game with our budget process to take money that's built up in a reserve for one program like our Transportation Trust Fund or Program Open Space and use it in one budget year to close a budget gap and then promise to pay it back in a future year. Those decisions don't have to be made if we're not advancing policies like an estate tax giveaway in this legislative session. We saw in this legislative session an effort to come through to push through an estate tax relief program for the heirs of millionaires, the top 3% earners in our state, at a cost of $432 million over the next 5 years. When you're pushing through legislation like that, you have to come up with beg, borrow, and steal to make the income gaps meet. That is not how I believe in budgeting. Now, on the transportation side, you're going to have a choice on this because in the next election, there'll be an issue on the ballot. The Transportation Trust Fund increases that we passed in 2013 included an opportunity for you to vote in the upcoming election to tie the hands of future governors to not use the Transportation Trust Fund for any purpose other than transportation priorities unless there's a fiscal emergency claimed and 3/5 of the General Assembly supports the effort to revise the money for other purposes. Moving forward, I think that having more fiscal austerity comes from a place of when you're running for governor, it's about setting priorities and building a budget around it and not just trying to come in every year and say, well, we're going to try to increase everything across the board, or we're going to try to increase everything a little bit and give a few haircuts here or there. You got to make tough choices. And I made it very clear over the course of this campaign that I'm not afraid to stand up and make the tough choices, to be very clear about what my priorities are and to build budgets around those priorities.
Thank you. Next question, Jerry Witt, Chairman of the Maryland Business for Responsible Government. Jerry?
This is a question about Baltimore City. Regions, not individual jurisdictions, are the economic drivers of our global economy, but the regions that are most successful are those with strong urban hubs. The most recent...
Can I interrupt you a second? I'm having trouble hearing you for some reason.
Okay. Maybe I'm speaking too quickly. The regions that are most successful are those with strong urban hubs. The most recent data from the U.S. Census Bureau revealed that between 2012 and 2013, Baltimore City's population growth has remained stagnant while Washington, D.C. saw an increase of more than 13,000 residents. If elected, what initiatives would you propose to help bring back to Baltimore City, bring people back to Baltimore City and improve the greater Baltimore region, as Baltimore is the strong urban hub of our general area?
Thank you so much. I fully support the mayor's call for trying to encourage 10,000 new families to move into Baltimore. But for that to happen, we're going to have to be proactive on a variety of fronts. I was, in 2011, happy to help lead the initiative to create new funding sources for rebuilding our schools. Our schools are the anchors of our neighborhoods, and in order to draw more people into communities, we have to have good functioning schools. And when I was walking through those schools in 2011, I saw things I never expected to see in schools. Kids couldn't drink out of the water fountains, toilets that won't flush, big gaping holes in the infrastructure. I came together to work with the Baltimore Education Coalition, Bill, the ACLU Reform Project, to come up with approaches on how we could leverage $1 billion new in school construction funding. But the problem for the city schools is a $3 billion problem. I have proposed in my Jobs and Economic Development Plan funding sources for phases 2 and 3 for the funding as well, with an innovative approach, collaborating with unions to do project labor agreements in exchange for an investment of their pension fund in that school construction authority, and to use a model that's worked well in 2 other states to draw down additional money for school construction. I'm not going to have time to go into the details, but they're in the plan. So school construction is one component part of that. Having wage bridges that draw people in through a living wage policy is a part of that proposal that I've been pushing and working on as well. And the third part has to be about addressing crime. We have the 9th highest crime rate in the country, but we can't just be tough on crime anymore. We have to be smart on crime if we want to break the cycles of recidivism. And you'll find, since I only have 10 more seconds, a full 18-page plan on my vision on how we would address public safety initiatives, very much focused on Baltimore City. And I think you take the economic piece, the public safety piece, and the education piece, they all come together. And of course, I began my statement about early childhood education and the universal pre-K program. That's a comprehensive view of how we begin to draw more families into the city and all of our urban centers in Maryland.
Thank you. Our cleanup hitter, Dr. Maribel Lesky, president of Towson University.
For the past 8 years, Maryland's higher education system has received increased investment from the governor and the General Assembly. During a time when states were exercising massive fiscal restraints on public higher education and dramatic tuition increases, Maryland continued to provide financial support for our institutions. So my specific question is, what will you do to further enhance the quality of higher education while balancing the accessibility and the tuition affordability issues?
Thank you very much. I was the first person in my family that went to college, and I had to pay for it myself. So I understand at a core level the importance of making sure that we keep higher education affordable. And one part of that is our tuition policy, but it can't be just our tuition policy, because for many families, whether you're talking about tuition being $7,000 or $10,000, it's still out of reach if you don't have access to affordable student aid and loan options. There were times where I didn't know from one semester to the next if I was going to have to withdraw from school to work a third job instead of a second job to build up enough money to pay for my tuition. And I didn't have access to all of the need-based financial aid that I wanted or needed because the university system was a little bit too focused on merit-based need, although I also competed for that as valedictorian in my high school. I want to see Maryland step in where the federal government has failed. I want us to look at creating low-interest loan opportunities for our students and to encourage the universities to push for savings at the administrative level, but to have tuition, to have student financial aid policies that aren't geared just so much towards merit, but also the financial need. We have to have that balance of affordability, accessibility, and predictability. And in terms of higher quality, we are blessed by having a lot of great administrators, aren't we? Who come together to have conversations with us about continuing to push the quality. But I think in the 10 seconds I have left here, an additional way that we continue to draw the best and brightest talent to our colleges and universities to teach here is to give them collective bargaining rights and allow university employees, college professors, our research assistants and grad assistants the opportunity to collectively bargain for their wages and benefits so that this state becomes a mecca for the highest and best talent in the higher education system to continue to push that quality. And our investments, of course, are always going to be a key portion of that. And I've been proud to be someone who has advocated and voted in favor of those budgets for the 8 years I've been in the General Assembly.
Thank you. And we've allotted 2 minutes, Heather, for closing remarks, summation, whatever you'd like to do.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity again. Great chance to see a lot of new faces coming to have these conversations with us tonight. What I have seen in living rooms and community centers all across this state are people who are ready for politicians who stay positive and prioritize policy over platitudes. We have to push for lawmakers who put people first, not the special interests. I'm the first candidate in 20 years to opt into the public campaign finance system. And And that makes me accountable to you. You'll hear throughout this campaign that there's not a lot of difference between me and the other candidates in terms of policy, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I am the only candidate in this race that has proposed a truly universal pre-K program, comprehensive middle class and small business tax cuts. I am a candidate that is standing up to put my values into action. I'm asking for you to come and join me, to push the status quo to a place where it's not business as usual politics in Annapolis anymore, but it's about what we need and want as voters in this state. I am the governor that Maryland is ready to elect. I lead from my heart. I stand with the courage of my convictions. I have the experience, the record of accomplishments, and the best vision for the future of this state. And I'm putting together a grassroots organization of people who are ready to help Maryland live up to her full potential again. We can create transformational change in this state when we begin to believe in again and elect officials who will stand up and fight for us. I'm Heather Mizeur. I ask that on June 24th you support the Mizeur Coates ticket for governor and lieutenant governor. And I thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. I talked in my closing statement about standing up for the things that I believe in and being willing to take on the toughest issues. And in November of this year, I put out a policy for us to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana because our marijuana prohibition laws have been an epic failure. They've been enforced with racial bias. While African Americans and whites use marijuana at the exact same frequency, African Americans go to jail 3 times more often for use. They're distracting our law enforcement from focusing on more violent and serious crimes. And when we legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana, we bring from the underground economy into the light of day. It gives us an opportunity to, first of all, keep it out of the hands of young people, because let me also be clear, on a developing mind, this substance still is a bad thing to consume until you're an adult. But we know that for adults, in terms of toxicity, in terms of addiction properties, harm to the body, marijuana is no more harmful than alcohol or tobacco, and it should be taxed and regulated similarly. And when we do, we can generate $160 to $70 million in revenue to pay for other priorities. I've dedicated that funding to pay for my early childhood education priorities. But I came into this legislative session saying, you know, it'll take an election and a mandate from the voters to change old ways of thinking in Annapolis, but we can make progress this year on at least decriminalizing possession so that we stop putting people into jail. We stop spending $280 million on incarceration, detention, and court costs associated with possession. And people said there was no way we were going to get it through. It was even declared dead 2 days before we adjourned. But I came together with a legislative black caucus with a different approach on how we could revive the bill on the floor, and that legislation passed right before we adjourned session. So at least in Maryland, we are now the 18th state to decriminalize possession so that you don't go to jail anymore. But I'm the only candidate in this race that would push us to follow in the footsteps of Colorado and Washington and bring about full legalization, bring that economy into the light of day, and have our economy benefit from the revenue instead of the drug dealers.
Any more questions? Young man in the front row. Heather, you want to repeat his question? So
Yes, and I didn't catch your name? No, your name.
What is your name?
Armand.
Are you a student, Armand?
So the question was about the city jail. And there was an article in the paper when I appeared before the Baltimore Sun Newsmaker Forum. There was a question about this. And my answer is twofold. First, you need to know that my approach in general is that in Maryland, we for too long have had an approach towards mass incarceration. We have had this cradle-to-prison pipeline that suggests that we'll just build the next jail to be ready for the next round of criminals. In 2011, I stood firm to fight against the O'Malley Brown administration's proposal to build a new youth jail in Baltimore City. There were only 40 youth in the system at the time. They wanted to build a 120-bed facility, and we know when we build it, we fill it, at a cost of $70 million. And we know that that money would be better spent in affirmative opportunities like job training and after school for our youth. But we also know that the existing jail is woefully inadequate. It was built more than a century ago, and its decrepit condition is almost inhumane. And while I am not someone that relishes the opportunity to spend $500 million in a future budget to rebuild a brand new jail, I'm also not someone that turns my head to the side and say, even though that doesn't fit with my policy of wanting us to change our approach to mass incarceration, that we shouldn't rebuild the jail. We're going to have to invest resources in rebuilding some version of a facility. But can we be creative in thinking through, can we invest money in rebuilding a facility in different ways? That stops thinking about waiting to address reentry issues only as a prisoner is getting ready to return to the community. Reentry starts at entry. And if we stop the revolving door of recidivism, we improve the opportunity of driving down crime in our communities. I want to end mandatory minimum sentences for the same reason. We've been rushing to fill our jails without any thought to what our real underlying policies need to be. And I want to bring those underlying theories and philosophies together with the budget decisions that need to be made on how much money we're investing in these approaches. So I'm trying to find a way that we can address the problems of the inhumane conditions of the jail without continuing to just throw money towards a system that I think has failed us for too long.
Thank you. Your staff is telling you you have someplace else to go, and I have to let you go. But thank you for being here.
All right. Well, usually when my staff says it's time to go, I always say, a couple more, but I'll listen to them tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to answer a few more questions. And I would encourage you to visit the website, heathermizeur.com. You'll find all of our issues. You'll find events around the state where you can come ask more questions in a more informal setting. And I thank you for your interest in the campaign tonight. And definitely tune in. All three of us will finally be on stage together starting May 7th with televised debates. And I encourage you to weigh in at that time, because I think the choice becomes abundantly clear when we're all on stage at the same time, which one of us is ready for governor, and she's going to be happy to serve you. Thank you so much.